every single one of us in one way or another. Some of us enlisted, some of us were drafted, some of us had deferments, some of us went to Canada, some of us protested, some of us were just confused, but all of us were affected by the war in one way or another. And for some of us, the effect of the war continues to this day, 50 years later. So this session is simply a chance for all of us to think back on that time and to share our experiences and to reflect on the legacy of Vietnam in our lives now. And after Jack McLean and Paul Henry and Susan Hackley and I share for a little bit, we're going to open it up and just invite all of you to share. And there's a lot of us, so we may have to do a limit of a couple minutes at the beginning per person, which I know is absurd, 2 minutes, but we'll just see as we go along. So the first person to share is Susan Hackley. Let me just say, Susan, in the first part of her life, had a wild and woolly and exciting life, but at some point it finally led her to Washington, D.C. and to board chair for the Alliance for Peace Building, which is a nonpartisan group of some 130 organizations working in 181 countries to end conflict and sustain peace. And Susan has produced and directed and created a film titled Veteran Children, when parents go to war. So Susan, over to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Jim. And I want to say what an honor it is to be part of your reunion and to be here with Jim and Jack and Paul, talking about the impact of the Vietnam War. I hope you've all read Jack's wonderful book, Loon, and hope some of you were able to see my short documentary film, Veteran Children, about the impact of war on America's children and families. The reason why I made this film, the story of that began in 1968, when my college boyfriend, Bill Foster, died in Vietnam. He had been against the war, but he allowed himself to be drafted. When his plane crashed into the South China Sea, I was full of grief and I was angry. His death in a war I didn't believe in changed me profoundly. After some years of roaming and living off the grid, I started working for change as a political operative. Then I was ready to leave politics, but not sure what to do next. I went to the Kennedy School, where I discovered the field of negotiation and conflict resolution, which was eye-opening. With negotiation skills, people with different strongly held beliefs can still have productive discussions. Years went by, and then our son, Zach, surprised us after his gap year of hiking the Appalachian Trail. He told us he wanted to postpone college and join the Marine Corps. While I hated that idea, it never occurred to me that he might be called on to fight, because it was a year before 9/11. Remember back then when there was absolutely no thought of war? So Zach joined the Marines, then 9/11 happened. And in 2003, Zach and his fellow Marines were suited up for biological warfare and sent to Iraq, where they launched the battle against Saddam Hussein's army. So here I was again with a loved one fighting in what I regarded as a tragic and misbegotten war. And those of us who protested the Iraq war felt our voices were marginalized, and we were even called unpatriotic. George Bush, who started the war, had twin daughters, and they were my son's age. I really wanted him to experience what it would be like if his children had volunteered to join the military too. And I vowed that whether my son Zach came home safe or not, I would try to do something to help civilian voices be heard in discussions about when and why we go to war. In any event, we were lucky. Zach came home from Iraq, changed, of course, but healthy. So as his mom, I knew that for every deployed soldier or Marine, there are multiple loved ones back home who worry, bear extra burdens, and sometimes grieve. When there's a death, the loss can be felt for generations. And to many Americans, these family members are invisible. So I decided to make a documentary film that focused on the children of American soldiers. While many veteran children are really strong and resilient, they all have questions. What is it like for mom and dad in that far off place? Is someone trying to kill them? Are they trying to kill an enemy? These children are rarely asked to discuss their feelings, and many children have unexpressed trauma. So I chose to focus on American families because if we civilians more fully understand the true costs of war, we might do a better job of articulating why we shouldn't go to war. Of course, it's much harder for children in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, where those wars are fought. I hope someday that people in these and other countries, for example, Northern Ireland, Israel, Rwanda, will ask their children to describe the impact of violent conflict on them.
This is a different topic.
So I'm just about done. I've shown the film on public television at universities, National World War II Museum on Veterans Day. This generates a lot of good discussion with veterans and civilians. Finally, I would add that I feel children should be taught not just the history of our wars, but the realities of war, including the benefits and costs. When kids are 18, they can vote and they can join the military. And I want these kids, our grandkids included, to make informed decisions. They should always honor and appreciate the service of those who are in the military, and they should feel that their voices matter when we talk about issues relating to war. Thank you so much.
Susan, thank you indeed. And now let's turn to Susan's husband, Paul Henry, our classmate. Paul.
Hi, everybody. Last night, I participated in a 3-hour session about Kevin Rafferty's film, Regular Guys, and all the issues that documentary raised about our Andover experience, mainly the toxic culture that pervaded Andover in those days, especially for some people, and how happy many of our classmates were. I got involved in organizing this event because Vietnam was another elephant in the room. It affected us all, and it's important and revealing to talk about it. I was asked to tell my own story, and although it's not all that interesting or noble, it's perhaps pretty typical. Vietnam was, in a word, confusing to most of us. Like many Andover boys of our era, my dad was pretty conservative, and he fought in World War II. He was even a decorated war hero, gravely wounded when his PT boat was struck by a torpedo in the Straits of Messina off Sicily, and he had to be rescued unconscious from the Mediterranean. So in part because of my dad, I thought hard about serving. And I applied to and was accepted by Navy Officer Candidate School. But the war just seemed so wrong to me, and I ended up saying no. And neither of my two brothers served either. My older brother, John, was a conscientious objector, and my younger brother, Charlie, claimed a dubious medical injury. So in the end, none of Don Henry's 3 sons ever served. I would add that I am humbled to be on the panel with Jim Monroe and Jack McLean, 2 Marines who were really in harm's way and who risked their lives for country and their fellow Marines. Whatever the rest of us might do in our lives, nothing quite compares with that. And as you now know, my wife Susan lost her boyfriend Bill Foster in Vietnam, and he didn't believe in the war either. And then she had to endure her son Zach enlisting in the Marines and seeing intense combat at the very outset of the Iraq War. So good for her that she has spent the past 25 years working in the fields of conflict resolution and peace building, and she's also produced a wonderful documentary film about the impact of our wars on the children and family of veterans. Now, it is my honor to turn to Jack McLean, combat Marine, author of Loon, and it's as yet to be published successor, advisory board member of Susan's documentary film, and all-around great guy.
Thank you. Paul. See, I'm unmuted, yes?
Yes.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm looking at just scanning some of the others that are here, and from some of the correspondence that went on before this, I'm just a couple of things stand out. Jock Reynolds and I have talked about Vietnam and Vietnam veterans for as long as it's been since I got out, probably, while Jock's been doing artistic things and I've been doing other things, but always a strong supporter of veterans during all his endeavors, starting at the Addison. So, Jock, great to see you. Randy, I really enjoyed the email that you sent about your experience, and I just was fascinated by the different things you got to exposed to while you were in the service. And I just and then there's 50 other stories there that everybody has a story, as I'm fond of saying. What I thought I'd do today for a couple of minutes is read a passage not from Loon, but from my new book that Paul cited. It's called Another Brother Found, a veteran's story. It's a follow-on to Loon. And it goes from Loon ended the day of my college registration in 1968, September 68. And this book, so it was just 2 years from Andover through the Marines. And this book starts with my registration and ends in May 2014, when I was able to reunite a family that had been broken apart with the death of one of my dear brothers in arms, Tom Morrissey. I thought I'd read something from the book that we all had in common. I mean, something that we all shared, which was my sort of the early years at Andover, and sort of how I got to why I did what I did, as opposed to what most others did. So if you'll indulge me, it'll take maybe 3 minutes. I'll just read this passage, the opening of chapter 2 from Another Brother Found. It begins again in September 1968, when I came home directly from Thanh Thien, Vietnam. I came home to a changed America. 2 years earlier, in the spring of 1966, I'd been a senior at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. Little had changed there in decades. An all-boys prep school that had been founded a year prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Andover graduates routinely matriculated to the country's most prestigious colleges and universities. Both Bush presidents, among other notables, had gone there. In my graduating class, 50 boys went to Harvard. The numbers for Yale, Princeton, and Stanford were comparable. Decades of prior classes boasted similar numbers. It was expected. It was the reason why parents sent their young sons off to such elite institutions. After arriving at Andover in the fall of 1961, I joined the school band as a trumpet player. On fall football Saturdays, as had been done for decades, we marched down Main Street up to Brothers Field. A highlight of our small parade came when we passed the headmaster's house. Band leader Bill Cliff would give the order to turn eyes right and lead us in playing Brave Old Army Team. Headmaster John M. Kemper, a West Point graduate, would stand at attention on the front steps. I enjoyed playing the trumpet in the marching band. I liked the uniforms, blue blazers, white pants, and a paramilitary discipline of learning to march in step with several dozen other boys. I also liked playing marches, particularly college fight songs, and always shivered with pride as we entered the football field before a game while playing our school's fight song, The Royal Blue. Having struggled in class during the week, those football Saturdays gave me needed structure and made me feel as though I was part of something bigger. I liked the feeling. We also marched down Main Street on May 30th to join the entire school community at the Memorial Bell Tower to honor our nation's war dead. Those Memorial Day parades included several dozen faculty members who were military veterans, most of them wearing their old uniforms. Many were World War II and Korean War veterans. Some were highly decorated, which added solemnity to the occasion. Along our route, we played the anthems of each of the 4 service branches. My favorite was the Marines' hymn. At the close of the ceremony, my lower year, I was selected to play taps. It was an unimaginable honor. Those annual Memorial Day ceremonies instilled me with a patriotic pride. They also helped me to understand the concept of national service. The faculty members, like most of our fathers, had served our country in the military. We felt that we were part of a continuum that would, like them, soon be called upon to serve as well. The school motto, non sibi, instilled us with a sense of purpose to serve the greater good. In the spring of 1966, during my senior year, Andover, like the rest of the country, was on the cusp of enormous social change. The band no longer marched down Main Street on football Saturdays. Memorial Day ceremony, if held at all, attracted only a smattering of students and faculty. The increasingly unpopular war in Vietnam was taking the air out of publicly recognizing those who had given their lives to create and defend our liberty. As graduation neared, unlike my classmates, I wasn't eager to attend college right away. I felt that doing something else first for a year or two might be more beneficial. Unlike students of today, my options were limited since military conscription was compulsory for all healthy 18-year-old boys not enrolled in school or college. It was the law. My father had served. Respected members of the Andover faculty had served. The extraordinary achievements of the recent military heroes like Eisenhower, Bradley, Marshall, Patton, MacArthur still resonated. There was an honor in military service. My parents had instilled this in me. Andover had reinforced it. I didn't want to join the military, and I certainly didn't want to fight in a war, but I also didn't want to go to college for the sole purpose of avoiding the draft. While home on spring break, I decided to depart from the long-established Andover norm and get my military obligation out of the way before starting college. Marine Corps had a program that required only 2 years of active duty, the shortest of all the service branches. It seemed right for me. I mean, I didn't ask at the time why they had a 2-year program. They were desperate for people. So I raised my right hand and I enlisted. I became the first Andover senior in memory to do so. I knew that the Vietnam War was heating up, but few people thought it would last more than a year or two. I was more concerned about surviving the looming reality of the Marine Corps' infamous Paris Island boot camp than I was the distant possibility of fighting in a war. Perhaps I surmised they'd make me a guard at the American Embassy in London. The Vietnam War escalated rapidly. By October, nearly 80% of my graduating boot camp platoon went directly to Vietnam. I was sent to supply school, but knew that my days in the States were numbered. In the summer of 1967, I received orders and joined Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines that fall. The next 12 months would become the bloodiest of the war. That was how I began. And I didn't think this for many years. I mean, I didn't think about being a veteran for many years. I'll just close by saying that I was, many of us were very defensive when we came back because as most people know now, Vietnam veterans were often considered to be the war. But it occurred to me maybe 20 years later when I'd speak to, say, Andover classmates, and why anybody would have been surprised that I would enlist in the service out of Andover when I'd been brought up the way I'd been brought up, with all the things I was just talking about. It seemed really like sort of a logical step. I will say one thing that I don't mention here, but I mentioned the other day when we were talking about getting ready for this. My mother and Jim and Rose's mother were friends and had become friends. And my mother was sort of confronting me in a scene that my cousin Ted recalls well. In our parlor, when I was announced I wasn't going to go to college, he said, "Well, have you thought about the military?" And I thought it was, I write about this in Loon, and I thought it was ludicrous. I mean, I haven't thought of the military. And then she said, well, I just talked to Jenny, Bill's mother, and she said Jim was thinking of going in the Marine Corps. I said, what? Jim? He's a good friend. He never mentioned this to me. And, but that gave me, Jim subsequently went in a year later because he had to have back surgery, as I recall. But that, knowing that Jim had even thought about it, made me think, well, I must not be completely crazy to think this is something I might do. So anyway, thanks for the time. I really look forward to hearing the comments of the others that are on the call. Thanks, Jim.
So thank you, Jack. Well, let me also then just share for a few minutes and then open it up to all of us. I just barely graduated in '65, having gotten D-minuses in several courses and didn't, along with Kevin Rafferty, get in anywhere. So did a PG year for a 5th year at Andover, and wanted to, Jack Kerouac was my Bible on the road. I wanted to get out and just do life, but I did have the back operation. So I, for some reason, a miracle, got into Williams. So I did a freshman year at Williams, but then I got D-minuses and I took my calculus final drunk, and which was fun, but then said, let me just go have an adventure. And the Marine Corps was offering a 2-year enlistment at the time, and Williams said they'd give me a 2-year break. So enlisted in the Marine Corps. It had nothing to do with defending our country. It had nothing to do with democracy, and it didn't really have anything to do with Vietnam. I just thought it would be fun, camping, riflery, great. So, and it took 30 seconds at Parris Island to end all that. But so I went into the Marine Corps and spent 1.5 years almost in the desert in Southern California. And then I said to myself, I don't want to go back and just tell everyone I sat around the desert. So maybe hard to believe, but I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I knew I wouldn't be killed. I knew I wouldn't be injured. I knew I wouldn't be afraid. I knew that I would just see cool stuff and that I would come back and be the next Norman Mailer and write, The Naked and the Dead. And so I continued, even with all the Marine Corps stuff, to be naive. So I got to Vietnam and continued my naivete. I was in an artillery unit and we were outside Da Nang, and for a couple of months, not much happened at all. Until the early morning hours of February 23, 1969. And that is when the war stopped being an adventure. February 23, 1969 was when everything changed. And really, February 23, 1969 has affected my life to this moment. It's another story, but our unit was overrun. I was in a foxhole. The guy beside me was killed. I got blown up by 2 grenades. Took a long journey to hospitals and ended up at Chelsea Naval Hospital in Boston. And finally, then in the summer of '69, got out. I remember Jack sent me a letter saying, geez, I was in Vietnam with bullets going over my head, but you showed me up by having one go through your head. So, and so I remember going to a little desk in South Boston and giving a piece of paper to somebody and him stamping it and walking outside all by myself, and the Marine Corps being over. And so I thought, well, that's that. And so I'll go back to Williams and just lead my life. And it took many years for me to even consciously realize that I had some stuff to deal with. And I was dealing with it, but I wasn't understanding what was going on. It was just things in my life, which is another story, all the PTSD stuff. And I will conclude by saying I've been a part of a veterans group for almost 40 years now that goes into schools to simply tell our stories. Every veteran in combat comes back to one degree or another with a wall. to be safe behind from the realities that they've been through. And sometimes the walls are small, sometimes they are huge. The best wall to protect yourself, sadly, tragically, from bad things happening to you is by taking your own lives. And the statistics, of course, are a lot stronger for vets. Alcohol, drugs. The wall I built was a strange one. It was the wall of being a really nice person. And if I could be a really nice person with lots of friends, then I could avoid having any one person coming over the wall to really get close to me and therefore be able to hurt me. So that resulted in 3 engagements in which, when she got close, I headed for the hills and finally said, I got to stop doing that because that's really awful. And finally, 10 years ago, a certain young woman started to come over the wall very slowly. And thanks to her being amazing, and thanks to an incredibly good shrink, and thanks to some wonderful friends, finally, at age 72, 2 years ago, I got married. And full, just unmerited grace in my life. So there's 8 million things that that we could still talk about, but right now, Shannon, if we could get everybody on the screen, we're going to invite anyone who would like to let's see, I got to go to the gallery view myself here. There we are. And so you can now raise your hand. Down in the lower right-hand corner, there's the means by which of clicking on that reactions to actually raise a hand. Anybody who'd like to share a little bit. I'm looking at my clock. We've only got like a half hour. So, it's crazy to say 2 minutes per person, but let's just try that for a little bit because I'm dying to hear what you got to say. So starting in my upper left-hand corner, Ralph, can you want to unmute and share with us just a little bit?
And listen, thank you, all 3 of you, for really wonderful stories. And Jim, I think I remember you particularly from French 1-2 with Chet the Jet Cochran. The 2 of us managed to get through that class as a twosome in the year. Talk about being able to show up without having prepared for class. There just wasn't anything like that. So my military, these stories are fantastic. My military experience is a lot different in the sense that I never felt in harm's way. I think I was a naval officer. I went into ROTC 2 years into college because, like many of you, I had a father who was a World War II vet and said, son, what are you going to do about the war? And I said something like, oh, what war? You mean that one? It'll be over. And this was in like 1966 or 67. But I finally realized that I didn't really believe in the war. I didn't really want to go to war. And so I did what some might have said, I draft dodged. And by that, I mean, I entered the Navy. And I went to ROTC for 2 years, and then I ended up going to a ship. The most dangerous thing I think I did in the Navy was that in practice sessions prior to our going out to sea for any length of period, we would do what they called, we had practice firing sessions with our 5-inch guns at targets towed by airplanes. And I had to, as the junior officer on board, I had to sit inside the gun mount while the shells went off, watching through a little hole, the check sight. And I was the check sight observer. And my job was to make sure there was nothing in the check sight little hole that I could see through other than the target. If I saw the plane, I was to alert them. And I asked one question once, why do I need to be in there? And my senior officer on the ship at the time said, son, got to have somebody to hang. So I learned really quickly that the military was no joke, but I was never in danger. And I served for 3 years. And part of that was on a shore base in Mississippi. And that's a whole nother story. But the one thing I came away from the military was that I was amazed at how quickly it makes you grow up. I had never done anything particularly important in my life other than study in school. And suddenly I was standing on a ship of the US Navy in which I was the officer of the deck and basically running the ship while the captain slept. And I said, if they only knew what responsibility they'd given to this guy, they'd go nuts. But somehow you did that sort of stuff. And that's kind of the most I can tell you about my career in the Navy. But it was eye-opening, and it made me a better law student when I went to law school afterwards. So, and I know there are many others that had experiences in the service. I know Randy did, and maybe similar to mine, maybe not. And I'd love to hear from the rest of you.
Ralph, thank you very much. That's great. Peter.
Let
You're
me unmute myself. I haven't read Jack's book and I haven't seen Susan's film, and I intend to do both as soon as possible. And Jim, congratulations on your marriage.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you a short version, and the somewhat longer version is in the book that we wrote for our reunion in 2015. I participated in my first anti-war demonstration on Memorial Day in 1965 at the Clock Tower. I protested what seemed to me to be a speech glorifying war. I went to Columbia. I was a hippie for a couple of years. I grew my hair as long as, Jim Lyons made me cut my hair twice in our last month in 1965. He sent me to get a haircut. I came back, he said, go get another one. So when I got to Columbia, I didn't cut my hair for 3 years. And I listened to a lot of music, and I spent a lot of time in clubs down in the Village. But when the Columbia strike happened, the anti-war strike happened in 1968, I joined. I sat in the buildings. I was arrested twice, and I stuck with SDS after that. I went to the Chicago Convention in 1968. The group of this faction of SDS that I was in became what's called the Weatherman faction of SDS, and I was a member of the Weather Underground from 1970 to 1977. So nobody shot at me. No one shot at me. 3 of my friends were killed making a bomb, which was intended to do something pretty terrible. And after the war ended, I left the underground. I was given a slap on the wrist by the authorities in Chicago, and I went to law school and have led a pretty ordinary life since then. Although one of the highlights of my years underground was meeting my wife, and we were married for 50 years. I'd say that experience is what I learned during those years has stuck with me. My politics are pretty much the same. I'm less optimistic about the chance for positive change than I was then. But Jim, you said when you went to Vietnam, it wasn't about defending the country. It wasn't even about Vietnam. And that's true. And that was true for the entire war. It wasn't about defending the country. Vietnam wasn't attacking us. And it wasn't even about Vietnam. Nixon and Johnson, they didn't care about, Kissinger, they didn't care about Vietnam. It was part of the 50,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese who died was part of a geopolitical game they were playing. It was a terrible thing. And that type of stuff goes on today. But I'm glad to hear your stories. I'm looking forward to reading Loon. I'm glad to see that you guys are doing so well. And that's my 2 minutes.
Peter, thank you. Gosh, jeepers. Well, Randy, over to you.
So thank you for putting this on, and Susan and Jack and Jim, what great presentations. I really moved. Jack, hearing you and the Andover preparation, and I would add to that, when I went to Princeton, the motto there was Princeton in the nation's service. I think we were all guided towards doing something bigger than ourselves for the rest of the community. And there was that guiding force. But I would also remind myself and everybody else that, gosh, William Sloane Coffin was a preacher at Yale, but I thought he preached every weekend at Andover. And, you know, it was incredible that Andover encouraged him to take the pulpit and talk against the war as frequently as he did. I joined up, same thing. My draft board said that I was going to be drafted on graduation day. And I said, you can't draft me. I volunteer. And I went into the Seabees in the Navy. And so I was building stuff for the Marine Corps and the Navy, as you know how the military loves acronyms, ACTOV, the accelerated turnover to the Vietnamese. So I was building stuff in the Philippines and Taiwan and Thailand and Japan, so that the war could still continue, but that the air forces would have bases that were more secure than Da Nang, that was no longer defended. So I was rarely in harm's way in all of that. And so Jim, in a way, I was very naive about that as well. And as I think back, you know, listening to what Brother Clapp just said, you know, I had the same news, I had the same information. And I always think back, you know, why did I choose to serve when others decided to? I had hockey teammates who went to Canada, other people who protested the war. And I think it was like Jack, it was this sense of, you know, this was what you were built for and all of that. So anyway, I think I appreciate doing this. I just want to leave with one final thought. Lynn and I lived in Japan for 3 years, and we got to visit the war memorials in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Nagasaki is interesting because there's a memo there from Eisenhower who said that the atomic bomb was an abomination and we should never use it and all of that. And so the war memorial in Nagasaki makes the United States the enemy. In Hiroshima, it is absolutely different. Hiroshima was the historic embarkation point for Japan going to China and going to Korea and everything else. And of course, it was the site for the first atomic bomb blast. And there's a building that still remains called the A-Dome. And the whole museum, the whole issue is that war is the enemy. It's not China, it's not Korea, it's not Japan, it's not the United States. The whole museum there is that war is the enemy. And Lynn and I went there 4 times when we lived in Japan. And I always thought that encouraging world leaders to go there and just spend 15 minutes leaning on the fence, looking at the A-Dome and thinking about the devastation and the horrors of war would be a sobering activity that would be very much worthwhile. So thank you for my 2 minutes and thank you for this event.
Randy, thank you very much. Let's turn to Chris Berry. Chris, if you want to unmute, kind sir, great.
Hi, thanks for putting this together. For me, it was pretty simple. My country called and I went. I signed up for ROTC while I was still at Andover, Navy ROTC, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And that's what I wanted to do. It turned out that I couldn't. I had very serious motion sickness. That never happened. But I went to Harvard in ROTC, and I remember wearing the uniform every Monday. In fact, I remember one of my Andover classmates, I was in my midshipman's uniform one Monday, and one of my Andover classmates that I met said to me, and I quote, "You're a fucking idiot," end quote. And that was the reception that we had at Harvard. It was so difficult that after our second year, they didn't make us wear our uniforms anymore. In fact, they didn't permit us to wear our uniforms because they were afraid of our physical safety. So I went through 4 years of Harvard. went into the Navy, didn't go to flight school because I learned in flight indoctrination that I had no aptitude for flying. Motion sickness was too much involved. So I went to a ship. I served for 4 years in ROTC in the Navy, and then went to law school. I paid no price for what having gone into the military, unlike many others who paid the ultimate price. But and in the end, it turned out to be a very beneficial experience for me. And I had responsibility. I had to perform every single day. And when I found I got to law school, I felt infinitely better prepared than my classmates had nothing to do. I dealt with all kinds of people and had experiences that have made me a better person throughout my life. That's my story.
Chris, thank you very much. I see 3 more hands and we've got about 15 minutes or so. So, again, keep it relatively brief if you can. We'll do Nick first.
Had to unmute, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to make this short also. Just a quick history here. In my family, the military tradition, although not substantial, did go back many generations. The only generation that it skipped, starting with the Civil War, was for the Spanish-American War. So my great-great-grandfather served in the Union Army. My grandfather was wounded in France, Purple Heart veteran in World War I. My father and his brother, my uncle, both served during World War II. My uncle nearly lost his life in France in a terrible, terrible battle against the Germans in southwestern France. Southeastern France. And then along came my generation, and I, in fact, enlisted after 4 years at the University of North Carolina. I got a deferred entry type of thing until October 1st of 1969, at which time I raised my hand, took my 2 steps forward and said I'd defend the country against all enemies, domestic and non-domestic and so forth. And as time, I'll just tell you a little bit about timing, then I want to tell you one thing that is really, really poignant, at least in my estimation anyway. You folks probably remember the draft lottery that came around on December 1st of 1969. My number was 363. Wow. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I was already in the Army, so they didn't believe in retroactivity back there. But had I been able to stiff arm them a little bit longer, I probably would never have gotten the chance to serve. So anyway, I went off to.
You could have sold that for a lot of money, that number.
There you go. So anyway, I did infantry training and advanced individual training as a combat engineer, and then went to Fort Belvoir in Virginia in the spring of 1970, where I ran into Roger Valkenburg, by the way, 2 years, our classmate, but ahead of me in the OCS program. Summer of 1970, the U.S. Army and the federal government decided it did not need as many second lieutenants, and they gave us the option to drop the course and just stay in the United States if we so preferred and finish out our enlistment, which is exactly what I did. And I ended up in Colorado, and for that I'm, I guess, pretty much eternally grateful to the Army, because I've loved it out here just about every minute. I would like to tell you about one thing that was very poignant. And I hope I can do this. October of 1973, I was on a road trip just to go down to northern New Mexico, and I ended up at a place called the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's the first memorial for Vietnam veterans in the U.S. And there on the wall in that memorial was a photograph of my cousin, who was a naval aviator who got shot down at the Gulf of Tonkin in 1966, and Bill Smoyer, PA, class of 63, as I recall. They were on the wall there and they were being honored. And if any of you ever get the chance to go to northern New Mexico, go to the Eagle's Nest area and go to the memorial there. It's just an incredibly moving thought. And I'm sorry, I can never tell this darn story without kind of busting up. But anyway, thanks for this opportunity. And thanks for putting this whole thing together. Jim, everybody, wonderful job. Thank you.
Jim, can I just say something? Jim, Joe, you're talking about Angel Fire.
Yes.
And Angel Fire is, I echo everything you said. It is one of the most, it was the first Vietnam memorial. It was created by the father of one of my brothers in the 1st
Dr.
Battalion.
Westfall.
Dr.
Yeah.
Westfall, for his son, who was a first lieutenant in my outfit. The day he was killed outside of Con Thien, we were just south of there, and we went up to recover him and the bodies, to blow an LZ and get them out. And it wasn't until years later when a buddy of mine was riding his motorcycle up there and he said, geez, Vietnam Memorial, I wonder what that's all about. And they went up and it was Angel Fire. I've spoken there, 8 or 10 times since on Veterans Days and Memorial Days. They've just came out with a book about it that they just sent me last week about the history of it and the Westfall family, but extraordinary. I just wanted to echo what you said. It is, I hadn't realized that Bill Smoyer was on the wall. Certainly wouldn't have known your cousin, but it was, I'll certainly keep an eye out when I go back. But
Yeah, they have a rotating thing. There's so many photographs that have been sent in that it's they put 12. Yeah. I think they change them maybe every week or every month, something like that. Yeah. But there's always 12 on the wall, and I believe that Lieutenant Westfall is always on there.
Yes,
so,
he is.
Just so you'll know, it's just the greatest. Or I don't know how that's not the word for it. Not even close.
First Battalion, 4th Marines, and a great guy.
Yep.
And a terrible, like all of them.
Thanks for letting me share this. I truly appreciate it. Sorry I got so choked up. Never helped. Never. Always happen. That's it. That's my way more than 2 minutes.
Jim, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I knew this would happen. I mean, there are 5 hands up. And I think, Shannon, that we're required to stop at 5:30. Is that right? So let's just do the best we can for the last 10 minutes. Joe Magruder, you've had your hand up for a long time.
Hi, also known as owner, I think, on the thing. I don't know where that comes from. Thanks to Jim and Jack, Susan, and everybody else who's spoken. I went to college on a Navy ROTC scholarship because I come from a military family, and I won't go into the details. We're pressed for time, but that included my father on the commanding general staff of the 8th Army Air Force, helping plan bombing raids against Germany during World War II. And anyway, so Navy ROTC, while I was in college, Pat O'Hearn, my then girlfriend, later first wife, no longer with us. A lot of people were working on me to, quit, to go to Canada, to be a conscientious objector. The latter two, I was just not doing. I thought about doing it, just saying no and doing 2 years in a federal prison. Some smart people persuaded me pretty quickly that wouldn't be a great idea or very good thing to do. So I ended up on a supply ship that cruised up in the Philippines, cruised up and down the South China Sea, and did underway replenishments with aircraft carriers, destroyers, and more, which is an amazing experience, especially in the dark. On the ship, I was fairly openly, though not loudly, anti-war. By the way, I forgot to mention, when I first got boarded the ship in Subic Bay, Philippines, the guy I was relieving, I was an ensign, he was a lieutenant. Within the first 4 or 5 minutes, we both agreed that if we had been born in Vietnam, we would be Viet Cong. And I was openly, not loudly, against the war. And one thing I did, I'm proud of on the ship, was the word got out that if you were really struggling with your conscience being on the ship, I did some counseling, informal, with people on that. People knew to come to me, and in general, I told them to be like John Kerry, serve your time to maintain your credibility, unless it was many years ahead, and it was never, that wasn't the case. But then fight the war, be against the war. I left the ship after a while, and the end of my Navy career, there were some interim things, but I ended up in Puerto Rico, where I volunteered to be part of two-person race relations education seminars that Admiral Zumwalt decreed the entire U.S. Navy had to go through. And so that was an eye-opening and very educational experience. I will stop there. Thanks to everyone, and good to see you. And I'm done.
Thank you, Joe. Doug, you've had your hand up for a while, so we're going to go to you, and you might sadly be, depending on how fast you are or slow, the last one, before I just give like 1 minute worth of a final thought. And so unmute, please, Doug. Doug, can you unmute?
Thank you, Jim. My nickname, as you guys may remember, was Flash, so I'll be quick. Nick, you will probably be amazed to know that my family tried everything we could do to get you out of the draft. The person who drew your number was Alexander Perney, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. And you can look it up. But unfortunately, you'd already enlisted. My story started at Andover, because when we were junior, I was a junior, I had massive surgery on my right shoulder. When I got to Stanford, I took ROTC because my entire family, as many of you have mentioned, was Army, 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 Army. I had a Silver Star winner as an uncle. My father was a major. My grandfather was a full colonel. So there was no question what I was going to do. So I took ROTC for 2 years. And as someone has said, we wore our uniforms, even in California, but we had to drill at 5 o'clock in the morning in the dark. I knew I had the shoulder problem. I took the physical early, just because there was a concern about the shoulder. I thought I was right. They told me that my shoulder was so bad that they were worried that I might drop a grenade in a foxhole when I was trying to throw it. So they classified me 1Y. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, you don't have to serve unless everybody has to go to war. And I said, what do you think they would put me? He said, you'd probably be a cook. And I said, I would probably kill more people with my cooking than I could do if I dropped a grenade in the foxhole. So I fortunately, for me, was able to spend, my last 2 years in college and then beyond there reading about, but not having to participate in what was obviously a very divisive and unfortunately terrible war. So that's my story.
Doug, thank you very much. And there's some other hands up, but we now are approaching 5:30. So let me just say in conclusion, in thanks to all of you, and there's a whole lot, many more stories than what we've heard. But from Peter Clapp's story to Nick's story to Randy's story, we've been across the spectrum in terms of how the war affected all of us. I want to thank Susan and Paul and Jack especially. And I want to conclude by reading a quote from Jack's new book, Another Brother Found. At one point in this, really, I've read the entire manuscript and it's terrific. And I really hope that it makes it out to all of us. Jack has a long section on the Vietnam Wall from its inception and Maya Lin designing it to the reactions to it, to over the years, the interactions people have had with it. But at one point, Jack quotes Senator Warner, who, as you may know, just died just this past month. Senator Warner said shortly after the initial dedication of the wall this, and I'll close with this. I hope that every president, whoever he or she is, will go down there on their first day or two in office and take a silent look at that wall by themselves, and if necessary, revisit before they make the decision to send our young people abroad in harm's way. Amen. So thank you all so much, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
And for
Great job.
happening.
Great job.
Good job.